Hello, I'm delighted to being with you today through modern technology. My wife Lily and I send you greetings from Loma Linda in Southern California, where both the medical center and the university church have been enlarged to accommodate the needed services for an enlarging employee population to meet the needs of a large patient clientele. We also want to wish you an inspiring and successful conference. And I want to thank you for the honor and privilege of serving you during this special hour of worship. May our vision be strengthened for enlarging our serviceability as true healers who will bring hope, health, and healing as we minister to the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of our patients. My guiding text this morning is found in 2 Chronicles 20:20. Believe in the Lord your God, and you will succeed. Believe and remain steadfast to his prophets, and you shall prosper. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, is badly shaken. Equipped only with a motley ragtag army, the word reaches him that a vast multinational army is moving towards Jerusalem, and he knows he is a goner. With his back against the wall, without any help in sight, the king prays a heart-rending prayer, and the Lord answers through one of the priests. Don't be afraid. Don't be paralyzed by this mighty army. The battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow, take your places, stand quietly, and see the incredible rescue operation God will perform for you. Don't be discouraged or afraid. The Lord is with you. The next morning, as his motley ragtag army moves into position, the king stops them and calls them to attention. He says, "Listen to me, O people of Judah and Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, and you will succeed. Believe and remain steadfast to his prophets, and you shall prosper." At the end of the day, the mighty multinational army is destroyed. Not a single one of the enemy escapes without any losses to the king's motley ragtag army. Today, we find a great awakening towards intelligent self-care for the chronic diseases as they go global. One of its leaders is the Reverend Rick Warren. He became concerned about his weight and the weight of his large congregation, and then he read the story of Daniel. And as he put Daniel's plan to the test, within 1 year, 14,000 of his members lost 250,000 pounds. As a prolific author of best-selling books, he got so excited that he challenged himself of taking this message to the world. But isn't he a Johnny-come-lately? Were we as Adventist church not entrusted with the sacred message of health through a divinely appointed vision 158 years ago? Were we not at the vanguard, at the forefront of such an approach that was so powerfully demonstrated at the Battle Creek Sanitarium years ago? With health being a most popular topic today, and with a strong health movement underway, here's my question for you. Will we as an Adventist church, and will we as members of that church, pick up the mantle again and lead? Or have we already been falling behind too far? To help us appreciate the richness of our health message, and to value anew the incomprehensible trust given to us by a loving God, a special creator, I want to take you back to the 1830s. In America at that time, it was a time of westward expansion, and that move towards the west also infected a man in Massachusetts. He packed his earthly belongings, his wife and 2 children, onto a covered wagon pulled by 2 horses, and he was on his westward way. His name? John Preston Kellogg. With Michigan then being the western frontier, the Kellogg's settled in the small town of Flint, and there they bought 400 acres of land, and they began to homestead. Tragically, the Kellogg's were sick most of the time, and the medical offerings of the time were just plainly pathetic, if not downright dangerous. Mrs. Kellogg's tuberculosis was treated with bloodletting. When the children got sick, they were made to vomit, they were bled and blistered, and they usually received some laxatives. And that was considered to be good medicine in those days. Now, when her tuberculosis got the best of her, she left behind a widower with 5 children and a new farm to take care of. Kellogg realized the need of a capable wife, and he found one in Anne Stanley. With her encouragement, the Kellogg's moved a few years later from Flint to another town in Michigan to the city of Battle Creek. Here, their 2-year-old daughter Emma got sick. She was diagnosed with having worms. The doctor prescribed some powerful drug. The drug caused epilepsy, and 2 days later, Emma was dead. Needless to say, the Kellogg's were bitter about American medicine and what it had done to them, if anything. Let's take a look. What was American medicine like in those days? American medicine in the 1850s was dominated by 2 powering men. One was Dr. Tully, the other Dr. Gallup. Now, Dr. Tully believed in strong drugs. He believed in opium, strychnine, and heroin. He believed that the body had to be artificially stressed by powerful drugs, and once stressed, the body then would develop a greater resistance to disease so as to take care of it. Well, needless to say, Dr. Tully and his physicians lost quite a few patients. No wonder that death was a frequent complication in the practice of medicine in those days. On the other hand, you had Dr. Gallup. He did not believe in the use of heavy drugs. He and his physicians believed in bleeding people. To them, it was very obvious. Inflammation and fever were the result of having too much blood. So they used leeches and surgical incisions for bloodletting. And they too lost a lot of people. Well, what was medical education like in those days? Medical education in those days was still in its infancy, and then anyone could become a physician. All you had to do is complete a 6-month course. You got your sheepskin and your certificate, and now you were a doctor and you could practice. Now, if you did not have access to any of these kind of doctors, then you would have to rely on the home health guides. These manuals helped to diagnose your illness, and at the same time, they provided you also with a variety of drugs. These drugs were very well under the maxim, a doubtful drug is better than none. And these drugs were pushed by an unscientific and unscrupulous drug industry. Any drug, no matter how worthless or outrageously adulterated, could be placed on the market. Any advertisement, no matter how fantastic, could be made. And any ingredient, no matter how habit-forming or lethal, could be used without mentioning it on the label. Actually, most drug advertisements contain testimonials from people who had since then died of the disease the drug was supposed to have cured. These drugs tasted absolutely terrible. They stung the throat. They gagged the patient, who was often cured after only 1 dose, simply out of fear of having to take another one. Now, if you didn't have the money to buy that home health guide and the drugs that came with it, then you would have to rely on folk medicine. Folk medicine, what was that like? Well, I'll give you some examples. For an earache, blow tobacco smoke into the infected ear. Yeah. For rheumatoid arthritis, go to bed with a cat. Place the cat at the foot at the end of the bed with your feet touching the cat, and it was believed that the arthritis would then leave your body and enter the body of the cat. What's better for you? Worse for the cat. Yeah. Uncooked food was believed to be poisonous. When bystanders saw a colonel in Boston eating a raw tomato in a public square, they all knew that he was committing suicide, because uncooked food was believed to be poisonous. Germs had not been discovered yet. Fresh air was considered harmful. Bathing more than once every 2 weeks was believed to be harmful and to undermine health, and required the prescription of a physician. Well, what about the fashions in those days? Well, the biggest fad in those days was the wasp waist. Broad on top and broad on the bottom, but narrow in the waist. No wonder they had to invent the corset to create those narrow waists. And then draping down from this tiny waist, they had these long hooped gowns, often weighing some 80 pounds and reaching down to the floor. Just imagine, with men then chewing tobacco and spitting the saliva and tobacco on the floor, and then with these long gowns around sweeping the ground, you get the picture. It was the ideal way to very effectively distribute germs and spread infectious diseases. No wonder that in those days, every 5th child died before reaching the age of 1. To summarize, the 1850s, an incredible time to be alive, interesting fashions, interesting medical concepts, interesting hygiene. But this was also the time when Charles Darwin published his book about the origin of species, which pushed his evolutionary concepts. But this was also the very time when the great spiritual awakening struck, which led to the establishment of many new denominations. And one denomination in particular was becoming characterized by a unique lifestyle and a philosophy of healthful living. This group was motivated by the belief that the human body was the temple of God, and to take care of the human body was perfectly okay. But you see, until then, the emphasis had been on only taking care of the soul. After all, the body then was seen more as a prison that was holding the precious soul captive from reaching the happier grounds. But this denomination, this church said no such dualism. This group had a more holistic perspective. They believed that taking care of the body was good stewardship entrusted to us by the Creator God. And they considered many of the Old Testament guidelines for health to be binding and helpful. And so, this Seventh-day Adventist denomination, organized in 1863, was convinced that it might be best to have its own medical institutions. They wanted to demonstrate the benefits of healthful living. These Adventists were persuaded by a remarkable Battle Creek housewife named Ellen G. White. This unusual woman, with only a grade 3 education, went to write more serious books published in more languages with a wider distribution than any other woman in the world. This humble Battle Creek housewife wrote much in the field of nutrition and dietetics, and in areas she had no real authority or training. Nevertheless, she laid the nutritional foundation for the Adventist lifestyle. In making a point about nutrition in 1901, she said, "The whys and wherefores of this I don't know, but I give you the instruction as it was given to me." The issue then was how much salt should be eaten. Her contemporaries were divided. Some wanted to ban salt, others recommended larger quantities, but her counsel was, use some salt. Amazingly, this was confirmed in 1977 when the US governmental dietary guidelines recommended to Americans to cut their high salt consumption to at least in half. Furthermore, she recommended to eat more coarse food. These were unrefined foods, lots of roughage, high in fiber. She also recommended to eat more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, and lots of beans and lentils, all simply prepared without all the grease, oil, and fat. And daily, she said, eat some nuts and seeds. She also recommended to eat less meat. How did she know that it would be wiser to eat less meat, if any meat at all? And to eat fewer dairy products, if any at all? How did she know? Especially when cholesterol had not yet been discovered and we knew nothing about the danger of cholesterol and saturated fats so commonly found in animal products. But there's more. She talked about tobacco as a malignant poison. In 1864, she wrote, "Tobacco is a poison of the most deceitful and malignant kind." Did you know that it took 102 years for the American Surgeon General to catch up with her in pronouncing a relationship between smoking and lung cancer? How did she know? She talked about electricity in the human body, and yet we had no concept then that every cell has a small voltage that we can then use in the principle of electrocardiography. How did she know? She talked about poisonous drugs causing birth defects. This was clearly before the time of the thalidomide scandal in Germany. This drug taken during pregnancy would give rise to boys and girls born with flippers instead of arms and legs. Drugs causing birth defects? Yes. How did she know this? She talked about alcohol. She wrote about alcohol damages the brain permanently. She advised mothers not to use alcohol during pregnancy because it could lead to the fetal alcoholism syndrome discovered in 1972. Here, children born to mothers who used alcohol during pregnancy were at risk of giving birth to malformed children, especially smaller brains. How did she know this in her day? In the meantime, in May of 1866, a little short man by the name of John Loughborough tried in vain to raise funds in Battle Creek for the establishment of the Western Health Reform Institute. Here they wanted to effectively demonstrate the benefits of healthful living. But Loughborough could not find any money until he came to the broom factory of John Preston Kellogg. Remember him? And his disappointment with American medicine? And what the drugs did to him and his family? Wanting to see a new approach to health and disease pioneered, he asked Loughborough, well, how much money do you really need? And then he signed a promissory note for $500, which today is probably $50,000. Well, Loughborough, short in stature, grew instantaneously several inches. He went across the street. He knocked on the door of the home of James and Ellen White. He could not keep the good news to himself. And then he asked them, and what can you do to help? And they told him, we'll match it. This then led to an outpouring of funds. And within no time, the Western Health Reform Institute opened its doors on September 5, 1866. The beginnings were humble, but the results were amazing. 10 years later, a young 24-year-old well-trained physician turned the medical world upside down. Sponsored by James and Ellen White, he took over as medical director of the Institute and promptly renamed it the Battle Creek Sanitarium. His name? John Harvey Kellogg, the 10th child of John Preston Kellogg. Amazing, isn't it? In those days, hospitals had the reputation of being the waiting room for death. Your chances of coming out of a hospital alive were 50-50. Over the next 10 years, Dr. Kellogg had served more than 20,000 patients in Battle Creek. With the usual average of 50% dying in hospitals, 10,000 of these patients should have died. Yet Kellogg, in 10 years, only lost 100. And it was this incredible record that catapulted the name Battle Creek into orbit, making it the medical mecca of the world. At its height, in 1906, the Battle Creek actually served 7,000 patients that year. And with a staff of 1,800, the sanitarium became the in-place for the wealthy and the prominent. This is where town and gown met. People like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Ivan Pavlov of classical conditioning fame with dogs. They all came to Battle Creek, as did the Mayo brothers, who learned many of their surgical skills from Dr. Kellogg, as did Arctic explorers. These explorers did not set off on their trail to discover the North Pole until they had visited Dr. Kellogg. They wanted to find out what would be the best nutrition to take along. Other prominent guests included John D. Rockefeller. He came to the sanitarium not only as the richest man in America, but he also came with a bleeding ulcer and desperate because he had been given only 6 months to live. When Dr. Kellogg saw him, he gave him a set of 20 health guidelines. But to these, he added one more, just for Mr. Rockefeller. He added, practice generosity. He told Rockefeller, practice these guidelines and you will live a long life. Well, John D. Rockefeller lived to the ripe old age of 98 years. Now, for Dr. Kellogg, nothing seemed to be more important in the recovery of health than teaching people how to live. He was a great surgeon. He was a remarkable teacher. He was a best-selling author. He had great curiosity, always involved in research projects and experiments. He was just a human dynamo. But he was also a remarkable teacher. Every evening at Battle Creek, the enrolled guests and patients would wait for the great moment when Dr. Kellogg, dressed in his white suit, would deliver his famous parlor lectures. That was always the highlight of the day, and nothing seemed more important to Dr. Kellogg than the advocacy of a plant-based whole food diet consisting largely of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and plenty of beans and lentils, plus some nuts and seeds. But with medical and health knowledge then still in its infancy, what made Battle Creek so successful as a treatment center? Well, some say that as long as Dr. Kellogg followed the health counsel of Ellen G. White, he was spared the treatment detours that other physicians had to go through via trial and error. Avoiding these treatment detours, some thoughtful authors believe that this was why Battle Creek was probably 5 to 10 years ahead of the clinical and health fashions of its day. Because of the success at Battle Creek with the advocacy of a holistic concept of health and lifestyle, the reputation of the Adventist Church also grew relatively fast. The lifestyle centered on a simple diet, plant-based whole foods, simply prepared, daily exercise with plenty of water to drink, and abstinence from tobacco and alcohol, and a balanced life undergirded by a faith and trust in a loving Creator God. The results? Longer life, better health, fewer chronic diseases that if they happened, they would happen 10 to 20 years later in life, what we call compressed morbidity. Let me share with you some of the clinical findings published in best-selling books for education purposes by some of the pioneers in today's lifestyle medicine movement. Nathan Pritikin, Dr. William Castelli from the Framingham Study, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who wrote the China Study, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Dean Ornish, and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, both well known for their angiographically documented reversal of coronary artery disease through changes in diet and lifestyle. No pills, no procedures. And then here now you see Hollywood getting into the act of promoting health. Their movie Forks Over Knives becomes a runaway bestseller. The film title suggests that the fork to eat with when you deal with heart disease may be more health restorative than the surgeon's knife. And this new approach to heart disease reaches also even into the halls of power in Washington. Take a look at President Clinton.
How did you lose so much weight? What kind of diet did you have? Well, the short answer is I went on essentially a plant-based diet. I live on beans, legumes, vegetables, fruit, no dairy, and it changed my whole metabolism, and I lost 24 pounds, and I got back to basically what I weighed in high school. But I did it for a different reason. I wanted to lose a little weight, but I didn't dream this would happen. I did it because after I had this stent put in, I realized that even though it happens quite often that after you have bypasses, you lose the veins because they're thinner and weaker than arteries. The truth is that it clogged up, which means that the cholesterol was still causing buildup in my vein that was part of my bypass. And thank God I could take the stents. I don't want it to happen again. So I did all this research and I saw that 82% of the people since 1986 who have gone on a plant-based, no dairy, no meat of any kind, no chicken, turkey. If you can do it, 82% of the people who've done that have begun to heal themselves. Their arterial blockage cleans up. The calcium deposit around their heart breaks up. This movement has been led by a doctor named Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, Dean Ornish in Genoa in California, the doctors Campbell, father and son, who wrote the China Study, and a handful of others. But we now have 25 years of evidence. And so I thought, well, since I need to lose a little weight for Chelsea's wedding, I'll become part of this experiment. I'll see if I can be one of those that can have a self-clearing mechanism. We'll see.
And take a look at his new lifestyle after he saw the film Forks Over Knives. And take a look at a major study done at Harvard University. Adopting a healthy lifestyle focusing on no smoking, only limited alcohol use, normal weight, daily exercise, and a good diet, these 5 lifestyle habits could substantially reduce premature mortality and prolong life expectancy in American adults by 12 to 14 years. Don't these films, don't these books, don't these lifestyle centers Don't these titans in the fields of medicine, nutrition, and science, and doesn't the emergence of lifestyle medicine remind us of the clinical success at Battle Creek of yesteryear? The recommended Adventist lifestyle has focused on a diet largely consisting of plant-based whole foods and on good health habits. These principles were laid down by Adventist pioneers and by divine inspiration. The clinical efficacy of such a lifestyle in the application of chronic disease has now been validated over the last 40 years. The clinical evidence is in. It has now been amply documented that such a diet can prevent, arrest, and reverse prominent killer diseases and prolong life. Moreover, lifestyle as medicine is emerging as the treatment of choice for heart disease, stroke, diabetes, hypertension, excess weight, prostate cancer, chronic disease, and depression. Amazing. In 1863, during the Great Spiritual Awakening, the Adventist Church was entrusted with a sacred message of health reform through a divinely appointed vision. These health reform principles were given by a God-inspired Battle Creek housewife. They were implemented by a gifted physician and teacher, and they were validated at the Battle Creek Sanitarium in a clinical fashion. And with this message and its effective implementation, the Adventist denomination used to be at the vanguard. We used to be at the forefront of this health movement. In 2021, we find ourselves in another great awakening, the lifestyle medicine movement. This lifestyle medicine movement is charging ahead at full speed. As a matter of fact, with its emphasis on a whole foods, plant-based diet and daily exercise, no risky substances like tobacco and alcohol, lifestyle medicine has become the fastest growing board-certified medical specialty in medicine in the United States. And beyond this, lifestyle medicine is now represented in more than 25 countries and expanding rapidly. Thousands of major scientific articles, books, prominent speakers, conventions, and many lifestyle centers proclaim that many of our prominent chronic diseases can be turned around. These diseases can be healed. How? Through a simple diet and a healthier lifestyle. Is the global emergence of this lifestyle medicine movement really then a new frontier, or is it a return to basics? Did the Battle Creek Sanitarium not provide us with some clear directions, namely that the key to health restoration is found in education and motivation to assume greater responsibility for our lifestyle and the blessing of God? Once again, as an Adventist denomination, and as members and leaders, we are called to lead and to honor God and to bring that message forward with vibrancy. Our health heritage, our health message, a sacred trust placed into our hands, a message of hope, a message of health, and a message of healing to bless others and to validate Him. And against all odds, facing a vast multinational army, King Jehoshaphat of Judah calls on his people, believe in the Lord your God and you will succeed. Believe and remain steadfast to His prophets and you shall prosper. And the same invitation is being extended to all of us this morning. Believe in the Lord your God, and you will succeed. Believe and remain steadfast to His prophets, and you shall prosper. May God bless us.